Welcome to Echoes of Africa, where hidden stories, bold voices, and untold truths rise from the heart of the continent. Before you dive in, hit subscribe and turn on the bell, because every echo here reveals the Africa they don't want you to see. Africa is no longer a quiet backwater in global power play. In 2025, the continent has become the center stage for a dramatic realignment of global influence. Nations long used to treating Africa as a resource periphery, raw materials for foreign factories, markets for foreign goods, are now in open competition to forge new alliances, military ties, economic corridors, and strategic partnerships. From the Red Sea to the Gulf of Guinea, and from the Indian Ocean to Sahel capitals, Africa stands at the crossroads of a new multipolar scramble. For decades, influence over Africa was fairly predictable. Former colonial powers in the West maintained diplomatic and economic ties. Nations like Russia and China quietly built mining, infrastructure, and trade links. Sometimes Islamic or Gulf states made individual investments. But nothing like what we're seeing now, a complex, multi-vector, global power realignment targeted at Africa, has happened before. The lines are redrawn. The stakes are far higher. In early 2025, a landmark announcement shocked many observers. One of the last remaining Cold War maritime loopholes would close. Russian Federation Navy secured official approval from Sudan to build its first African naval base on Sudan's Red Sea coast. The base, long negotiated and stalled, was now back on track, allowing Russia to station ships, including nuclear-capable vessels, and giving Moscow a permanent foothold in a vital maritime corridor linking the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. In the same year, Russia deepened its presence in West Africa. A new military port access agreement with Togo granted it privileged access to the Gulf of Guinea, a strategic maritime junction connecting Atlantic trade routes to the heart of Africa. Joint port access, shared intelligence, military training exchanges, and logistical cooperation were all announced in a sweeping pact. This was not subtle. It was a statement. Russia re-enters Africa and not as a fringe actor, but as a major naval and security player, challenging traditional Western influence, challenging China, and adding a new node in global strategic rivalry. But Russia wasn't the only actor repositioning. In April 2025, Asia's rising power, India, launched its largest ever naval exercise with African countries, the inaugural Africa-India Key Maritime Engagement, AIKME, hosted off the coast of Tanzania and involving navies from Kenya, South Africa, Madagascar, Mauritius, Mozambique, Seychelles, and more. The exercise was billed as maritime security cooperation. On the surface, it addressed piracy, illegal trafficking, and fishing. But beneath the waves, it sent a message. India wants to reclaim influence in the Indian Ocean, challenge China's dominance, and position itself as a security partner for African nations. Meanwhile, the powerhouse of global investment, China, hasn't paused. Its decades-long belt and road infrastructure drive remains active and increasingly militarized. By 2025, more than 70% of African armies reportedly operate Chinese-supplied armored vehicles. Chinese navies maintain constant deployment around the Horn and Gulf of Aden, and joint military drills with African forces have scaled in frequency and sophistication. But the contest is not only naval or military. It spills into economics, diplomacy, and political alliances. The rising global demand for critical minerals, lithium, cobalt, rare earths, platinum, oil, gas, has turned African soil into strategic real estate, which foreign power controls access, processing, refining, and shipping will likely shape 21st century global industry. As powers race to secure supply chains, African states are gaining bargaining power and global leverage. Take West Africa's Atlantic coastline. With Russia's new Gulf of Guinea access, the potential for dual-use ports, energy export corridors, and naval logistics has surged. At the same time, India's renewed maritime cooperation may attract investment and development around ports in East and Southern Africa. China's already vast infrastructure network ranging from railways to ports remains a formidable anchor. All of these converge on the question, who gets to influence, invest in, and profit from Africa in the next decade? But it is not a zero-sum game. Many African nations are no longer forced to pick a side. They treat this as a negotiation, using competition to extract better deals, diversify partners, and maximize national interest. This shifting paradigm marks a departure from decades of dependency. Today's African political leadership knows that global powers are competing for influence, and that gives Africa leverage. That leverage is visible across multiple sectors. In mineral-rich Sahel states and coastal nations, resource-for-security deals have proliferated. After coups in 2023 and 2024, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso distanced themselves from colonial alignments and sought new defense partners. In 2025, Russia hosted high-level talks with all three under the umbrella of security cooperation, promising military training and support in return for logistic rights, overtly shifting the balance away from Western influence. At the same time, China continues to extend military outreach through financing, training, and hardware supply, cementing influence broadly across Africa. For Africa, this strategy is double-edged. On one hand, more partnerships can yield better infrastructure, investment, and security. On the other hand, the risk of becoming a chessboard in foreign power rivalry is real. The wrong alignment or overdependence on any single power can backfire, especially if global geopolitics shift. What's more interesting is the silent rise of new influencers beyond the traditional Big Three: West, China, Russia, Middle Eastern Gulf states, India, Turkey, Brazil, even smaller Asian and Latin American powers. Their strategy is often less aggressive but more strategic, building economic partnerships, offering investment, diplomatic respect, and trade. For many African governments, these relationships appear less burdened by colonial history and more adaptable. India's naval expansion into Africa is just one example. Under Institute analyses, Indian training programs for African military personnel have surged, both via naval cooperation and defense industry partnerships, giving African defense forces more options than ever before. The broad-based competition is reflected in diplomatic summits, defense pacts, port deals, mining agreements, energy projects, and infrastructure investments. Africa is now a contested arena for global strategic influence. But unlike past eras dominated by a handful of powers, the current contest involves dozens of actors, each with their own agenda, and each offering African states more flexibility. This flexibility has led to a significant strategic shift. African countries are increasingly using competitive leverage diplomacy. Instead of aligning permanently with one power bloc, many are playing powers against each other, securing multi-vector support, diversified investment, and maximized gains. This is more than diplomacy. It's statecraft, reshaping how African nations assert sovereignty and negotiate value. Take, for example, recent deals in West and Central Africa. Gulf investment in mining and infrastructure, Russian security cooperation, Chinese port finance and trade, and Indian maritime security. All are simultaneously active in overlapping regions. This creates a complex web where no single foreign power can dominate. The result? A new balance of power that advantages African autonomy. But this realignment comes with risks and challenges. Rising foreign competition increases instability and strategic pressure. Proxy conflicts, overlapping interests, and divided loyalties have the potential to spark conflicts if not managed carefully. For African states, maintaining sovereignty and balancing competing powers requires strong institutions, transparent governance, and long-term strategic thinking. Critics warn that this scramble could lead to new forms of dependency, not through colonial-style rule, but through debt, opaque contracts, and security-driven deals. The pressure to supply minerals, grant port access, or sign defense agreements could undermine democratic governance in countries with fragile political systems or weak accountability structures. There's also environmental and social cost. Many of Africa's strategic minerals lie in fragile ecosystems. New port constructions, railways, and mining zones threaten ecosystems, displace communities, and stir potential conflict. As global powers compete for resources, there is risk of a race to exploit, where environmental regulation becomes secondary to profit and strategic advantage. Yet, even as these risks manifest, many African voices argue that this moment of multipolar competition represents an opportunity to reinvent governance, development, and sovereignty. If managed properly, competition can be transformed into cooperation, investment into shared development, and influence into empowerment for African people, not foreign powers. Indeed, across the continent, there are signs that African governments are thinking long-term. Strategic alliances are being negotiated publicly, and new regional institutions are being strengthened. Investment in infrastructure, human capital, mining regulation, and fair trade is receiving renewed emphasis. There is growing pushback against boom-and-bust foreign deals that deliver little if long-term local value is not guaranteed. The global scramble for Africa in 2025 is not a return to colonial scramble. It is something new. It is a contest not just for resources, but for influence, technology, security, trade, and global supply chain control. Africa no longer sits idly. It negotiates, aligns, realigns. Africa plays chess, not checkers. For global watchers, this means existing power structures are about to be shaken. Europe might lose dominance in Francophone Africa. China may face serious competition for influence and access. Russia might deepen its military presence, but will need to navigate a crowded field. India, Gulf states, and emerging powers stand to gain influence, but they will all have to compete against each other. For Africans, this is a historical inflection point. They have the opportunity to reshape their continent's future, economically, politically, and socially. They have the resources, geography, youth, and strategic position. But whether this moment becomes a renaissance or a scramble depends on vision, negotiation, and leadership. The world is entering a new era of multipolarity, and Africa stands at its center. The outcome will not only determine the fate of the continent, but influence the global balance of power for decades to come. You've been watching Echoes of Africa, where every story carries the sound of tomorrow. If this moved you, subscribe now, like, and share so Africa's voice never fades into silence.